When the door closes, the wall starts to breathe. An inscription found on the inside of a walled cell. Brother Thaddeus arrived at the Abbey of St. Hubert at dawn. It was the end of March, the ground still held ice in the shadows, and the morning air smelled of last year's leaves burned in the field. He was 27. He had nothing with him except a rough bag, a small manuscript tied in a linen scarf, and a name that was already beginning to fade from human memory. He was unknown in the settlement, and Brother Wojciech, the senior gatekeeper, looked at him for a long time before unlocking the old gate. "Where are you from?" "From the road," answered Thaddeus. "And where are you going?" "To where one can be silent without fear." Thus he became a new brother in this stone womb of God, rising on a hill, wrapped in winds, prayers, and fear. The abbey had its glory: scribes, doctors, herbalists, 80 souls, locked in the rhythm of the bell time. But there was also a silence there that could not be explained by singing or prayer. It was a silence that looked at you. Not silence, but presence. Brother Thaddeus became the caretaker of the scriptorium. He was given a small cell in the south wing that smelled of lime and old ink. It was dark even in the daytime, and the window was as narrow as a prayer horn. But he did not complain. He never complained. He wrote a lot, more than was necessary. His lines carried questions, not answers. In the margins of the Bible he made subtle notes about human will, about fear of the invisible, about God who is silent when he is called upon most. One of those notes, even before his punishment, had stirred the abbot: when truth cannot stand the question, is it truth? No one knew why Thaddeus had gone to the monastery. It was rumored that in his youth he studied at the Salerno school, read Avicenna and Origen. That he had something dangerous in his hands, not poison, not a sword, but a word. He never argued, but asked. And that was scarier. One brother, Milos, young, with the face of a chick, later said, "You couldn't hate him. But it was cold around him. He looked, and you seemed to see yourself not where you stand, but where you will end up." Thaddeus prayed at night. His voice was without anger, without praise. Only a quiet conversation with silence. There is a special silence in the monastery. It is not silent, it waits. And if you look into it for a long time, it begins to respond. One day, at 3 o'clock in the morning, Brother Theophilus passed by his cell and heard him whisper, "If God is light, why is he so afraid of shadows?" This was already the limit. The abbot, a man strict and just within the limits of severity, called him to him. They talked for a long time. No one heard the conversation, but from that evening Thaddeus did not appear in the refectory again. He did not come to the service. He did not visit the scriptorium. His cell was sealed. And the next day, they began to build a wall on the north side of the monastery. Quietly. Without explanations. Only 3 monks knew that this was a new penance. An old method, preserved since the time of the Hermit Fathers, imprisoning a living person in a stone so that the soul can see itself without the world. In the next part, how to live in silence, which no longer waits, but swallows. The first days in the wall. Memories that become stronger than prayers. And the border where faith ceases to be a support. A wall is not a prison. It is a mirror. 13th century. Somewhere in the depths of Eastern Europe. Truth is not light. It is weight. And when it is more than you can bear, you either break or become silent. He was walled up on the 3rd day after meeting the abbot. Silently, stone by stone. Without shouts, without witnesses. The room he found himself in was shaped like a semicircle. It was below ground level, like the remains of an old crypt. Candles and wine were once kept there. A narrow opening in the wall allowed bread and water to be passed through. No windows, no echoes. The silence in that room was not emptiness, it was a body. It breathed nearby. On the first day, Brother Tadeusz did not speak. He only sat on a stone, his eyes closed, as if listening. In that darkness that knew no hours, he suddenly realized that the body has memory, and memory begins to speak when everything else is taken away. He remembered the smell of cinnamon from his childhood, when his mother baked bread for midsummer. He remembered how, at the age of 9, he got lost in the forest. How he stood there and didn't call for help, not because he couldn't, but because he had already felt then, fear becomes quieter when you accept it. The next day he began to sing psalms. Quietly. The voice came from the depths, like water from an old well. Then he stopped. Because the silence didn't answer. The silence of God is not a punishment. It is an invitation. But not everyone wants to go there. On the 5th day, he was given a sheet of parchment and a coal rod. One of the brothers must have felt sorry for him. Perhaps young Milos. He began to write on the walls. He didn't write prayers. He wrote things he was afraid to forget, the smell of wormwood on the road to Krakow, the timbre of the voice of the woman who sold him an apple, phrases from books whose names are no longer there, of his mother, his brother, the child he had once buried in someone else's field. He did not hold on to life. He held on to reality, which was dissolving into stone. The cell was always damp. The ceiling was constantly dripping, slowly, like a clock. 1 sound per minute. This rhythm became a prayer. Every drop was a witness. One day, around the 12th day, he spoke again. This time, not the Psalms. He said aloud, "I am not a blasphemer. I simply wanted God to speak not only to the strong." No one answered. But it seemed to him that someone was listening. Not outside. Inside. Philosophy among the stone, when a person is deprived of movement, he begins to move inward. And this movement is more terrible than any exile. Because there, deep down, there is no lie. There's only the image of yourself, as you are. Without roles. Without a name. Without protection. Does true faith begin after the fear of death disappears? Or, perhaps, does it disappear with it? Faith is easy to lose. But it is even easier not to notice that you have lost it. One night, or maybe during the day, he no longer knew, Tadeusz woke up from his own scream. He dreamed that he was standing in a square, naked, and people were throwing books at him. Not stones, books. And he was crying because he could not remember a single page. One line, written on the wall, "I want my words to survive, even if I do not." The abbot ordered no one to speak of Brother Tadeusz. Not out loud, not in confession. His name was removed from the censuses. And only one brother, the same Milos, preserved a scrap of parchment where Tadeusz wrote, "Freedom is not when the doors are open. It is when you are no longer afraid that they are locked. There is a time before darkness. There is a time in darkness. And there is a time that even darkness does not see." On what day he broke down is unknown. Perhaps on the 20th. Perhaps earlier. Because in darkness there are no days. There is only a shadow between sleep and wakefulness, between body and memory. The hours died without a sound. Like birds in mines. Each second felt longer than 3 days in the world outside. He began to speak to himself. Or rather, to someone inside himself. "Tadeusz," he whispered. "If you are still here, say something. If not, be silent." He was silent. And he believed himself. And he did not believe. Food came. Every other day. A crumb of bread, water with a faint smell of iron. This smell reminded him of his childhood, when the wound on his knee bled into spring water. Once, instead of bread, someone handed him an apple. It smelled like the sun. So sharply, so impossible, that he cried, holding it in his hands. He didn't eat. He cried. Because the fragrance was a memory of what was no longer available. And the worst thing was not hunger, but the remembrance of what had been light. He continued to write on the walls. No longer in lines, in words. Mother watered voiced, "I, God." When there was no more room, he began to write on the ceiling. Then, on his own skin. First with charcoal. Then with his fingernail. Then, with blood from his finger, which he drew with a sharp bone from a fish brought for Lent. It seemed to him that the chamber was expanding. That he could see the outline of a door. That on the left was a window. And through it was a field. And then he realized that it wasn't the chamber that was expanding. It was memory trying to hold on to the shape of the world. In order not to lose the concept of exit, the brain was drawing it. The brain is the last to lie. The soul is the first to disappear. There was one day when he laughed. For no reason. Just like that. From behind. The laughter lasted an hour or a few seconds, he didn't know. Then came shame. Like after a sin. And he began to pray again. Not to God, but to time. Bring me back. Or finish. But don't leave. There were moments when he heard footsteps. Real. Slow. Behind the wall. Tadeusz, as if someone was saying, "Are you still there?" And he didn't answer. Because he didn't believe. Maybe it was God. Or maybe it was his mind that had become God. One dream repeated itself over and over. He was walking along the library, and all the books were empty. The paper was white. He tore open one volume, and there was not a word in it. And then he heard a voice. Words exist only for those who have someone to say them to. He woke up in the dark. And there was no one. Not even God. It was a time when he stopped saying his name. It no longer belonged to him. I am not Tadeusz. I am simply someone who is still breathing. He no longer remembered the streets, his family, his studies. Only the simplest things remained: a drop, a wall, a body, a voice, an expectation. Everything else became alien. And one day he asked aloud, "If I die here without giving my name, who was I?" The question hung in the air. But in the silence he heard the answer. From within himself. You were the one who did not agree. Is it possible to kill a person without touching them? Yes. By depriving them of space, time, and witnesses. He learned to fall asleep standing up. And he learned not to wait for the morning. Because there were no mornings. Only one state, existence without a guarantee that it will continue. He wrote the last word on the wall with his blood. It was crooked, heavy, with a mistake. Sorry. It was not clear to whom. God. Mother. Himself. Perhaps to the world, which he never understood. Pain can be endured. Loneliness can be accepted. But when you forget who you were, it's no longer death. It's dissolution. There was no light. This is important. Because in the end, it's not the torment itself that breaks a person, not hunger, not cold, not lack of sleep. What breaks is the absence of a source that takes you out of yourself. When even pain doesn't distract you. Tadeusz no longer counted the days. His face became covered with a thin fungus, and his eyes constantly watered from the dampness. The skin on his fingers cracked. His nails became soft. His voice was a whisper even in his dreams. He no longer recited psalms. He didn't mention names. All that remained was the feeling of movement that came not from outside, but from within. He called it the breath of silence. He began to see things that weren't there. First, images: a stork in a cell, tapping its beak on a stone, a girl with white hands standing in a wall, a letter that appears on the floor and disappears like water, then voices. Most often, his own. But now it sounded not as a sound, but as a memory of a sound. Like a taste on the tongue that wasn't there. Listening to yourself is the scariest thing. Because you hear not the truth, but all your mistakes at the same time. The body gradually departed. He no longer felt pain in his legs. Only a viscous cold in his bones. When he touched his chest, his heart beat not rhythmically, but like a stone sliding down a mountain. Each blow seemed final. And each time was not the last. One day, or perhaps night, he imagined a door. It was wooden, old, like a mill's. And it stood not in the wall, but inside it. Behind it was noise. Not voices. Not singing. Just noise, like a wind field. He approached, touched, and heard. It's still early. Eventually he had a fear that he hadn't had before, that he would never get out of here even after death. That the soul, having gotten used to the stone, would remain in this chamber forever. That the stone would become the body. And the silence, God. You can get used to anything. And that's the scariest thing. He stopped praying. Not because he had lost faith. But because he didn't know who he was praying to. Because if there was no one but yourself, then prayer becomes a whisper in the mirror. And he learned to be silent not out of fear, but out of respect. For what he didn't understand. For what remained higher than him. Even in silence. There were moments of enlightenment. Once every many days, or hours, he didn't care anymore, he felt joy. Simple. For no reason. I'm still here, he whispered. And that's enough. Once, when the water had not come for 3 days in a row, he thought that they had forgotten about him. And then he smiled. Maybe that was a good thing. He saw the window again. But now, not in the wall. But up there, in the darkness. Above his head. And through it, a star. He knew it was a hallucination. But it was warmer than reality. And he said, I thank you that even in a fictional world there are windows. He stopped walking. He lay down. His breathing became thin. His heart quiet. And his thought, one who will be my witness. No one in the monastery spoke of him anymore. The abbot died. He was replaced by another, a stricter one. The younger monks knew only rumors. And they believed that the walled-up cell was empty. There was breath left in the cell. Sleep. And silence that no longer waited. Because it had already become a part of it. There are deaths that come with pain. There are deaths that come with peace. And there are those that don't come at all, because there is no one to go to. Brother Tadeusz's body no longer belonged to him. It became part of the wall, part of the silence. When he breathed, it seemed that the cell itself was breathing. Not a single muscle moved without effort. But death did not come. It stood nearby, like a dog that watches but does not bite. His last thoughts no longer had words. They were images, sensations, light impulses in a fading consciousness. He imagined a hand, not his own, not God's, just a hand touching his forehead. And the smell, not of earth, not of rot, but for some reason, of warm milk. He was not afraid. And there was nothing to wait for. When time disappears, fear disappears. Once, at a moment that could not be called either day or night, he felt that he was not breathing alone. That someone was nearby. Not a presence. But something else. Like an echo of words not yet spoken. He whispered, if you are God, forgive. If you are death, accept. If you are me, do not disappear. The silence remained silence. But it was softer. Somewhere outside the cell, life continued. Rain fell on the roof of the monastery. In the refectory, someone was rereading the Benedictine rule. Blackbirds sang in the garden. The world did not know that there was still one person breathing in it, someone they had forgotten. Tadeusz could no longer imagine faces. All memories were erased. But he remembered the colors: fire, red, grass, green, sky, blue. The last movement of his body was not a gesture, but a spasm. And not from pain. From fatigue. Very deep, like that of a stone that had lain at the bottom for hundreds of years. Rivers. Then, nothing. Not darkness. Not light. Just emptiness without silence. He did not know that he had died. Because there was no one to tell. And that is why the soul did not leave. It remained, suspended in the air of the cell that never had a window. And began to do what it feared most, to bear witness. In the monastery, over time, they began to say that something was wrong in that part of the wall. That the stone did not come down at night. that a candle placed nearby would go out without wind. A young novice who arrived half a century later said that he heard someone whispering from the depths, "I am still here." He was mocked. Then he was chased away. But the cell was not opened. Not out of respect, out of fear. Nothing was left in the cell, the body was not found, the clothes were rotting, there were no inscriptions. Only a trace, round, dark, like a shadow under the knee, and a single word written from the inside on the stone, was. There is a legend that in the Abbey of St. Hubert, sometimes someone hears footsteps in the north wing. Someone whispers Latin words that are not in the Bible. Someone breathes in the rhythm of drops. Not a spirit. Not a person. A word that has not yet found someone to be spoken to. History does not remember everyone. But it preserves traces, for those who know how to look slowly. The abbey was not destroyed by time, but by people. Many years after the death of Brother Tadeusz, a war came here, not a big one, not a glorious one, but a quiet and dirty one. The soldiers did not know the names, they did not look for shrines. They looked for food, metal, warmth. And when they did not find any, they burned. The wooden ceilings burned quickly. The stone, more slowly. The smoke settled in the corridors like a second sky. The bell fell and cracked in half. And in this crack, they said later, the smell of hot iron and old wax lingered for a long time. No one remembered the northern wing. The cell without a door. The wall that once breathed. When it was all over, years passed. Birds settled on the burnt area. Then, shepherds. Then, oblivion. The stones were dragged to build roads. Part of the monastery was dismantled to its foundations. And only one piece of the wall remained standing, as if untouched by time. An old man found it. Not a monk, not a warrior, not a scientist. Just someone who was collecting stones for a bridge. He didn't know why he had stopped there. He would say later, the stone was warmer than the others. There was a mark on it, a dark, semicircular one, as if someone had been sitting for a long time, leaning their back against it. And a little higher up, a scratch. Not an inscription. Not a sign. Rather, an attempt not to disappear completely. The old man couldn't read. But he felt it was not just a stone. He left it. And left. In a century, someone would call this place a legend. They would say that a heretic was walled up there. Another would say that a saint. A third that there was nothing there, just a fiction to scare children. But the truth, as always, was simpler and more terrible. There was a man who lived, who thought, who did not give up on himself, even when the world was taken from him. Brother Tadeusz did not leave school. He did not found a movement. He was not rehabilitated. He was not canonized and cursed openly. He simply disappeared. And that is precisely his presence. Because sometimes freedom is not about leaving. It is about remaining yourself where you are not expected to. Time erases names, but it does not erase questions. Power passes, but the fear it gave rise to remains in stone. Faith changes languages, but the silence between words is the same. Maybe Brother Tadeusz was wrong. Maybe he was too brave. Maybe the world was not ready for his questions. But the world is never ready. And if today, in the dark corridor of the old church, you suddenly stop for no reason, and it seems to you that the stone next to you is warmer than it should be, do not be afraid. This is not a ghost. Not a sign. This is a memory. Because we die twice. The first time, when the heart stops. The second, when no one else is listening. And as long as someone is listening to this story, Brother Tadeusz is still here.